I'm Lorna, and for the last 12 months I've been Policy Officer for Early Years Scotland. There's been quite a lot happening in policy over the last 12 months, which has been great given the break that we had during COVID, where everything became very reactive. So it's nice to be able to sort of do a bit of planning and be involved in anything and everything at policy and decision making level that is relevant to early years. Over the last 12 months we've been doing quite a lot of activities. The introduction, for example, of a blog written by myself as Policy Officer has been really popular, and we've just been trying to sort of talk about things in a more informal, light-hearted way where appropriate. I've written some really serious blogs about some really serious topics, but also some really fun ones about children singing and my own experiences in playgroups and things like that, and they've been really well received. And I'm always keen to hear if anyone has any ideas about subjects and topics they'd like me to cover in the blog. I'd be more than happy to do that. I've also got a dedicated Twitter account, which is at EYS Policy Lorna. I'll always welcome any suggestions that may come in about topics for the blog. Want to make sure that it remains relevant and that it's something that people want to read, rather than just me writing things that I think people might want to hear about or kind of that might start a discussion. The blog also kind of supports a new avenue which we've taken, which is a dedicated policy Twitter account. So I'm at EYS Policy Lorna. Please feel free to follow me. And I try and sort of share as much information as possible about things that I think might be relevant, and sort of engage in conversations. And the purpose of social media being to connect. Do that with other people that work in the sector, people in different children's organisations, people in the wider voluntary sector, because although we are early years, got to remember that a lot of what we do crosses a lot of other strands. So, we talk about child poverty, we talk about housing, we talk about health, we talk about all sorts of different topics like that. So it's been a really good platform to be able to engage, and as I say, please feel free to give me a follow. In terms of consultation work, there's been an awful lot more, and that's really one of the kind of crux things that a policy officer will do within an organisation. I joined this organisation just before COVID, and we responded to a couple of Scottish Government consultations or calls for action from the Scottish Parliament and committees and things like that. But when COVID hit, that all stopped. So we're in a position now where not only are we dealing with the after effects of the pandemic, but we're also trying to catch up with the policies and practices and legislation that weren't enacted or put into place during that time, and all of the new things that have come as a result of COVID and that were going to be coming anyway in terms of a programme for government. So there's a lot going on, and we've been quite heavily involved. Throughout this year, we've responded to Professor Ken Muir's consultation, which was looking at a number of things, but to us, the kind of most relevant thing was where early years sits, whether it's within care, whether it's within education, and also how inspection works. And from that, the Scottish Government have released another consultation around an inspection framework, a joint shared inspection framework for early years, which would mean that we would still have the Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland. There'd still be two separate bodies, but there would be one framework. Early Years Scotland did a lot of engagement work with our members and the wider sector to gain their views for that, so we could make sure that the response that we put in was as informed as possible. The general consensus was that it's not that there's an issue as such with a shared framework. However, if you're going to still have two separate bodies inspecting in two different ways, then a shared framework won't matter. We called for the establishment of one single body. We think it would be much better in terms of independence, in terms of clarity, and it would make things a lot easier for the sector at a time which really is quite difficult for them. So we need to kind of, bear that in mind as much as possible. We're also looking at the national discussion on education that's going on at the moment at the kind of the tail end of this year. And we're looking to put together a little video project about that, rather than just a standard consultation response. It's quite light on early years, so we want to not only reflect early years but do it in a really early years way. So we're looking for settings to give us pictures and videos and things like that, which should make a really nice little accompaniment to a written response as well, obviously. During this year, I've also been involved in a really exciting project which we got funding from the Scottish Government to carry out, myself and one of the service managers here, a project on the mental health, happiness and well-being of children aged 3 to 5. So we engaged with 6 local authorities throughout Scotland, and we prepared online questionnaires for the workforce, for the children, for parents and carers of children aged 3 to 5, and also parents and carers of children in primary 1 to 3 who maybe sort of carried out their transition from a setting, nursery or childminder, into school during COVID, to see if there was, how that worked, and also children who were transitioning this year and who were going to be transitioning, what we could do to make things easier and better around that, what would support children's mental health, wellbeing and happiness, what the sector needs to be able to properly support that, and also examples of best practice, because it's important to note that there is a lot of good stuff going on out there. So we wanted to really reflect that in the report. So that's with the Scottish Government at the moment, and it will be published in early 2023. So we're really looking forward to seeing how that all fits together. It's going to come from that. There was recommendations made, and the Scottish Government has, committed to making sure that these are actioned. So it's a really, really worthwhile, important piece of work that we've done. So it's been really exciting. As policy officer, I've also been carrying out a bit of engagement work with our families in the services that we provide directly. It became clear that there are a lot of families who we're working with who are not getting everything that they're entitled to because they don't know where to go to apply or how to apply. So we've been doing a lot of supporting work with our practitioners who have built up amazing relationships with these families. Our practitioners have built up trusting, really strong relationships with families, and that's allowed me to go in to get to know mums and dads and grands and granddads and carers and things like that, and sit with them and do a bit of income maximisation work just to make sure that they're getting everything that they're entitled to, and I've also provided support around things like housing applications, issues around domestic abuse, employment, kind of talking to parents about maybe what they'd like to go on and do now their child's ready to within a setting or moving into a setting, opportunities for education or employment, bearing in mind that a lot of people haven't perhaps been in the labour market before, or they'll be returning after a long period of time. And that's been really worthwhile, and it's added a really good dimension to our work from Early Years Scotland, especially from a policy perspective, because I feel like it's really reframed the way that I respond to things and the way that I kind of reflect what we are doing, because we always talk about making sure that we've got lived experience and the voices of the people that we work with, and we have always done that, but this has just given us that extra boost of being able to do that, and it's a pleasure to work with our families and with our wonderful children and with our fantastic early years practitioners. So that will continue as part of the sort of wider policy agenda that we're doing. I think it's also really important to be aware that we can't talk about policy at the moment without mentioning the cost of living crisis. It's everywhere, it's affecting everyone, it's affecting the children and families that we work with, it's affecting our members, it's affecting our staff, and so it's just something that we need to be really mindful of, and we know that the Scottish Government have said that they're going to have to make cuts, and that's quite frightening and quite daunting from a voluntary sector organisation perspective, but also we know the impact that this could have on the people that we work with, as I say, whether that's our children and families or whether that's our members. So we've got a real obligation to make sure that we're as up to date as possible, that we are keeping people informed of, if there's new entitlements or that sort of thing, but also empowering them to be supported throughout this. It's a really difficult time, and the winter especially is going to be really difficult for people. So we'll do what we can, because we've got these relationships with our families. We want to make sure that they're okay, and that's sort of something that's very much part of all of the policy work that we're doing. We're being very mindful of the fact that things are very different for people, and we're making sure that this is reflected in our responses, and it's a really difficult time for the sector as well, and I think that was really well reflected by our CEO Jane when she attended 2 Scottish Parliamentary committees.
It has been extremely challenging, and yes, you do have that local government ability to make those local decisions, but then the PVI sector, childminders are caught in the middle somewhat. So I note from the papers that originally there was talk of a national advisory rate, and that's something that we think would have helped matters, because as you can see in the figures and in the papers, the rate does vary hugely, and we understand that there are necessity for rural uplift and different figures like that, but when there is no evidence given around a prescribed national benchmark rate, then you can see what naturally happens. So we've got members that have settings across a range of local authorities, and they've to try and work with such varying rates. So that is really, really difficult. And I think also when Graham talked about the challenging issues for staffing. That is a huge result of these varying rates, because the PVI sector is consistently required to sort of open their books, so to speak, and have regularly been asked to demonstrate how they come to their cost basis, but that's not the same level of scrutiny for local authorities. There's not the same level of data collection, so you don't have that consistent picture as well. So it's very disheartening for the sector to constantly have to do this and then not necessarily seeing any change. There are some local authorities, as Graham has said, that members are saying do work really well with the PVI sector, and there's a lot of engagement, and that's where things work well. But a lot of the time there is not that level of engagement and participation and discussion with the PVI sector around the needs, which we appreciate differ locally. But as we try to attract and retain high quality staff in ELC, that's very difficult when they're hemorrhaging out of the PVI sector to the local authority sector, because the PVI sector and childminders can never compete with the wages. And obviously the aspiration for a real living wage has been problematic, because that's not very aspirational, and a lot of the sector are saying, well, I could leave the sector and earn £10.50 an hour in a role where I don't have the same level of bureaucracy and issues around paperwork and all the scrutiny involved in that. And like Graham in Earlier Scotland, we absolutely adhere to ensuring we have high quality settings, but that is also causing problems as well. So where you have the varying rate and then you have the varying payments to staff, and you don't have that ability to attract more staff in. So we've got members saying that they've lost up to 80% of their staffing to local authority settings or other career paths, and that is because that is just seen as a more attractive offer. So it's very difficult, huge challenging staffing issues, but how do you address that when we don't see any evidence of for example, some local authorities, as you read in the papers, gave a national uplift, others didn't. Some authorities give recognition towards additional support needs payments or additional payments for eligible twos. So the picture varies so widely across Scotland, so that is so challenging for the sector.
We're so committed within this organisation to sort of squaring the circle, if you like, to making sure that the voices of our members and our children and families are reflected to higher levels, to policy and decision makers, but also how the decisions made by those people within those positions of power are going to impact on us. And we're the ones that are called on to make sure that things are, will this work? Is this a good document? Is it accessible? That sort of thing. So please rest assured that we're always working to make sure that your voices are heard and reflected, and we'll pass that information back to you as well, so that you can really see the difference that your participation, whether that's in a session, whether that's as a member, as part of a filling in a survey, being involved in an online focus group, that sort of thing. It's all really important, and we really, really appreciate it, especially at the moment when everyone's facing a lot of challenges, and we've got a real responsibility to make sure that that's reflected.